and basically whatever the hell I want. Hello everybody and welcome to Gene's Reviews from a regular dude here in my car. I'm back again today. I took yesterday off, just wanted a little break. Being lazy, you know. Today I thought we'd check one out from Most Amazing Top 10. I find this stuff really interesting. It says isolated tribes in the world that just want to be left alone. I've seen some videos of a video in particular where a guy goes to one of those lost tribes and he was never seen again. I think they had dinner, if you know what I mean. Let's check this out.
Deep in the Amazon, there are tribes still fighting to stay hidden from the modern world. And as the forest disappears around them, these tribes are being pushed closer to the edge of extinction. These are isolated tribes that want to be left alone. Out in the deep jungles of Peru, there's a tribe that's about as isolated as you can get. The Namole, or Mashkopiro, live in total seclusion in the Manu National Park, which is so rich in wildlife, it's practically its own world. For years, they've avoided contact with outsiders, but in more recent years, they've started to pop up now and then, mainly to get food or supplies from
you don't want to get too close.
And while
be
that
shooting
does
their
sound
darts and
nice,
arrows and
this
stuff
can actually be pretty dangerous.
See?
There's a huge concern because any exposure to the modern world could wipe them out, with diseases that they have no immunity to. Even basic stuff like the flu or a cold could be fatal, and there have been some violent cases. Back in 2015, a local guide was killed by a bamboo-tipped arrow, which is believed to have come from a Namole tribe member trying to protect their space. The Peruvian government's response has been to keep parts of their land as protected areas to prevent more outsiders from encroaching, but
I came across something like that. There ain't no way in hell I'd go near it.
While also respecting their wish to stay out of the modern world. The Karubo tribe are also sometimes referred to as the Clubbers. They do not listen to EDM music. They're called the Clubbers because big wooden clubs are their preferred weapons. They're one of Brazil's most notorious uncontacted tribes. They live deep in the Amazon, where they've managed to keep their distance from the outside world for centuries. Things started to get shaky for them back in the 70s though, when outsiders, including government officials and missionaries, tried to reach them. They've been known to react aggressively to anyone they see as a threat, and there have been cases of them ambushing people who wander too close to their territory. With that said though, there have been some peaceful interactions. Like most isolated tribes though, they're under constant threat from loggers and miners who don't care about their boundaries. There are so many isolated tribes in Brazil's Amazon. One of the most famous photos shows a few people from an uncontacted tribe hiding behind the jungle, aiming arrows at an outsider taking pictures. It's a reminder that for these tribes, the outside world is not a place they want to be. The Brazilian government tracks these groups through photos and aerial surveys, trying to make sure that they just stay protected. But with illegal loggers constantly creeping in on their land, their survival is at a serious risk. These tribes are living in some of the most biodiverse areas on Earth, but their homes are being wiped out bit by bit as the forest disappears. Experts like Jose Carlos Morales Jr. have been working for decades to help protect these tribes, but with more threats from outside, it's a tough battle. The Toromona tribe is another group that fiercely guards its territory. They live deep in the Madidi and Heath rivers, far from modern life, but not far enough, apparently. Oil companies and workers have started to creep in. Back in 2016, a group of workers from a Chinese oil company ran into them while they were cutting through the forest. They came across some broken branches, footprints, and there were also a bunch of tortoise shells scattered around. But then they started hearing shouting from deeper in the trees. Moments later, the Toromona showed up and made it very clear they weren't cool with uninvited guests stomping through their territory.
No doubt.
The oil company ended up backing off after that, but the damage was already done. Even one brief contact like that can be dangerous. The Toromona are super vulnerable to outside diseases since they have little to no exposure to the modern world, and what makes it worse is that the Bolivian government has spent years pretending that they don't even exist, which of course makes it harder for groups to fight for their protection. Meanwhile, companies just keep sniffing around trying to tap into the land's resources. Living on the edge of extinction, the Kawahiva
Those photos where they're like up above, going down on them, and they're looking up at them, you can tell they don't see stuff like that every single day. They'd have no idea what that is. They think it could be something evil, or they don't know. I wouldn't risk it personally. When I go, I want to go in my sleep, hopefully. I don't want to be on the end of some spigot over a fire, if you get my drift.
People are one of the most elusive and isolated tribes in Brazil. They live in the Rio Pardo region of Mato Grosso and are known to be nomadic, meaning they rarely stay in one place for long. The Kawahiva are incredibly secretive, and most of what's known about them comes from the things they leave behind, like tools, arrows, bits of food. They've been under constant threat, mainly from illegal loggers and land developers who try to push them out of their territory. Even though there are technically laws in place to protect them, like the Rio Pardo indigenous area, enforcement has been lax, and their land just keeps getting encroached on. There have been cases where arrests have been made, but more often than not, loggers and squatters just seem to get away with it.
It's all about money.
Called the forest people, are one of the most endangered tribes on the planet. They live deep in Brazil's Maranhão state, and while there are about 350 of them in total, only around 100 are still uncontacted. But for them, the outside world is a very real and constant threat. Their history of isolation goes back to the 1800s, when settlers started cutting through their land. That forced the Awa into more of a nomadic lifestyle, always moving, always trying to stay one step ahead of outsiders. Even though their territory was officially protected in 2003, thanks to pressures from advocacy groups like Survival International, it hasn't stopped the invasion. Illegal loggers are still sneaking in and tearing up the forest, putting the tribe's entire way of life at risk. And it's not just trees being taken, it's lives as well. There's an awful case from 2011 where a young Awa boy was killed by loggers. So sure, there are laws on paper, but there's not enough enforcement on the ground. The Tigiri are one of the most remote tribes in the Ecuadorian Amazon. They originally split off from the Huarani people back in the late 60s, mainly because they didn't want anything to do with the missionaries who were trying to convert them. Since then, they've completely cut themselves off, not just from outsiders, but even from other Huarani groups. They've stuck to their own path, living deep in the forest and avoiding any contact with the outside world. But it's not like they've been left alone. Their land sits right on top of some valuable oil reserves, which means oil companies and loggers are, of course, creeping in. The Tigiri don't take that lightly. There's been violent clashes with intruders, and they've made it very clear they're not interested in talking. They want people to stay out, period. No one knows exactly how many are left, but it's estimated there are only about 20 to 30. The Yanomami people are one of the largest uncontacted tribes in the world, living in the remote borderlands between Brazil and Venezuela. This is a pretty large group. There are around 35,000, so they're no strangers to contact with the outside, but there are still a handful of smaller groups that are still very isolated. Fortunately, the tribe's land is in an area where there's lots of gold to be mined, so you can see where this is going. For decades, miners have been encroaching on their territory. The consequences have been pretty disastrous for the tribe. Illegal gold miners have brought with them diseases like malaria, which have devastated the tribe's population. There have also been cases where miners have resorted to violence to force them off their land. Back in 2019, the Brazilian government said that they were thinking about opening up Yanomami land for mining, which would have been a total disaster for them. It would have meant more outsiders showing up, bringing diseases, violence.
That's probably why that one tribe only has like 20 or 30
people
left.
The Yanomami have already dealt with enough of that. Groups like Survival International have been fighting to keep that from happening, constantly pushing for their land to stay protected. But the pressure from mining companies and other outsiders hasn't really gone away. West Papua is home to a number of uncontacted tribes deep in the rainforests, and unlike the tribes we've talked about in places like Brazil, these groups don't have government
His eyes don't
protection.
look too
While in
friendly.
places like Brazil, there's agencies like FUNAI that
Him
step
either.
in to protect the tribes. In West Papua, there's basically nothing in place to stop outsiders from disturbing the tribes. This part of Indonesia is super remote, and a lot of the tribes have stayed hidden from the modern world for that reason, but they've still been under pressure for years. Logging, mining, oil, military activity. One of the only groups actively trying to help is Survival International. They try to raise awareness about these uncontacted tribes, but they're also careful not to share too much. Like, they avoid giving out exact locations or specific details about the people, because the last thing anyone wants is missionaries or other groups going in and trying to make contact. That would be a disaster, not just because of the risk of spreading disease, but also because it's just annoying. The Ayoreo live around the border of Bolivia and Paraguay. Most of them have had some contact with the outside world, but they're still a small group, about 100 or so, who live in complete isolation. They're split into smaller groups, with some up north in the Gran Chaco and others farther south. Like a lot of uncontacted tribes, the Ayoreo are constantly under threat. Cattle ranching, deforestation, land being sold off. These things are pushing deeper into their territory. There are laws that say that they have a right to their land, but those don't always mean much.
Right.
Some landowners just pretend that there aren't any tribes there at all, or they flat out just ignore the rules and keep grabbing land anyway. Missionaries have also been a big problem over the years. They've tried to convert the tribe and drag them into a world that they never asked to be a part of. With all that said, I've been your host, James.
That's some scary stuff, in my opinion. They just want to be left alone, and I think that was the best answer right there. Just leave them alone. You don't want to be dinner. Let me know what you thought of that video in the comments down below. Now, if you made it this far, it's time for a joke. Yesterday I went to the store. I bought a banana, an apple, and a dozen eggs. And the cashier said, "You must be single." And I said, "Wow, how did you know that?" And she said, "Because you're ugly."